Chapter I. Well, human excellence is of two kinds, intellectual and moral. One now the intellectual springs originally, and is increased subsequently, from teaching, for the most part that is two, and needs therefore experience and time, whereas the moral comes from custom. And so the Greek term denoting it is but a slight deflection from the term denoting custom in that language. From this fact it is plain that not one of the moral virtues comes to be in us merely by nature, because of such things as exist by nature, none can be changed by custom. A stone, for instance, by nature gravitating downwards, could never by custom be brought to ascend, not even if one were to try and accustom it by throwing it up 10,000 times, nor could fire again be brought to descend, nor in fact could anything whose nature is in one way be brought by custom to be in another. The virtues then come to be in us neither by nature, nor in despite of nature three, but we are furnished by nature with a capacity for receiving themo, and are perfected in them through custom. Again, in whatever cases we get things by nature, we get the faculties first and perform the acts of working afterwards, an illustration of which is afforded by the case of our bodily senses. For it was not from having often seen or heard that we got these senses, but just the reverse. We had them and so exercised them, but did not have them because we had exercised them. But the virtues we get by first performing single acts of working, which again is the case of other things, as the arts for instance, for what we have to make when we have learned how. These we learn how to make by making. Men come to be builders, for instance, by building harp players, by playing on the harp exactly so, by doing just actions we come to be just, by doing the actions of self-mastery we come to be perfected in self-mastery, and by doing brave actions brave. And to the truth of this testimony is borne by what takes place in communities, because the lawgivers make the individual members good men by habituation. And this is the intention certainly of every lawgiver, and all who do not effect it well fail of their intent. And herein consists the difference between a good constitution and a bad. Again, every virtue is either produced or destroyed from and by the very same circumstances, art too in like manner. I mean it is by playing the harp that both the good and the bad harp players are formed, and similarly builders and all the rest. By building well men will become good builders, by doing it badly bad ones. In fact, if this had not been so, there would have been no need of instructors, but all men would have been at once good or bad in their several arts without them. So too then is it with the virtues, for by acting in the various relations in which we are thrown with our fellow men, we come to be, some just, some unjust, and by acting in dangerous positions and being habituated to feel fear or confidence, we come to be, some brave, others coward. Similarly is it also with respect to the occasions of lust and anger, for some men come to be perfected in self-mastery and mild, others destitute of all self-control and passionate, the one class by behaving in one way under them, the other by behaving in another. Or, in one word, the habits are produced from the acts of working like to them, and so what we have to do is to give a certain character to these particular acts, because the habits formed correspond to the differences of these. So then, whether we are accustomed this way or that straight from childhood, makes not a small but an important difference, or rather I would say it makes all the difference. Chapter II. Since then the object of the present treatise is not mere speculation, as it is of some others, for we are inquiring not merely that we may know what virtue is, but that we may become virtuous, else it would have been useless. We must consider as to the particular actions how we are to do them, because, as we have just said, the quality of the habits that shall be formed depends on thee. Now that we are to act in accordance with right reason is a general maxim, and may for the present be taken for granted. We will speak of it hereafter, and say both what right reason is, and what are its relations to the other virtues for, but let this point be first thoroughly understood between us, that all which can be said on moral action must be said in outline, as it were, and not exactly, for as we remarked at the commencement, such reasoning only must be required as the nature of the subject matter admits of, and matters of moral action and expediency have no fixedness any more than matters of health. And if the subject in its general maxims is such, still less in its application to particular cases is exactness attainable. 5. Because these fall not under any art or system of rules, but it must be left in each instance to the individual agents to look to the exigencies of the particular case, as it is in the art of healing, or that of navigating a ship. Still, though the present subject is confessedly such, we must try and do what we can for it. First, then, this must be noted, that it is the nature of such things to be spoiled by defect and excess, as we see in the case of health and strength, since for the illustration of things which cannot be seen we must use those that can. For excessive training impairs the strength as well as deficient, meat and drink, in like manner, in too great or too small quantities, impair the health, while in due proportion they cause, increase, and preserve it. Thus it is therefore with the habits of perfected self-mastery and courage and the rest of the virtues. For the man who flies from and fears all things and never stands up against anything comes to be a coward, and he who fears nothing but goes at everything comes to be rash. In like manner too, he that tastes of every pleasure and abstains from none comes to lose all self-control, while he who avoids all, as do the dull and clownish, comes as it were to lose his faculties of perception. That is to say, the habits of perfected self-mastery and courage are spoiled by the excess and defect, but by the mean state are preserved. Furthermore, not only do the origination, growth, and marring of the habits come from and by the same circumstances, but also the acts of working after the habits are formed will be exercised on the same. For so it is also with those other things which are more directly matters of sight, strength for instance. For this comes by taking plenty of food and doing plenty of work, and the man who has attained strength is best able to do these, and so it is with the virtue. For not only do we by abstaining from pleasures come to be perfected in self-mastery, but when we have come to be so, we can best abstain from them. Similarly too with courage, for it is by accustoming ourselves to despise objects of fear and stand up against them that we come to be brave, and after we have come to be so, we shall be best able to stand up against such objects. And for a test of the formation of the habits we must take the pleasure or pain which succeeds the acts, for he is perfected in self-mastery, who not only abstains from the bodily pleasures but is glad to do so, whereas he who abstains but is sorry to do it has not self-mastery. He again is brave who stands up against danger, either with positive pleasure or at least without any pain, whereas he who does it with pain is not brave. 6. For moral virtue has for its object matter pleasures and pain. Because by reason of pleasure we do what is bad, and by reason of pain decline doing what is right, for which cause, as Plato observes, men should have been trained straight from their childhood to receive pleasure and pain from proper objects, for this is the right education. Again, since virtues have to do with actions and feelings, and on every feeling and every action pleasure and pain follow, here again is another proof that virtue has for its object matter pleasure and pain. The same is shown also by the fact that punishments are effected through the instrumentality of these, because they are of the nature of remedies, and it is the nature of remedies to be the contraries of the ills they cure. Again, to quote what we said before, every habit of the soul by its very nature has relation to, and exerts itself upon, things of the same kind as those by which it is naturally deteriorated or improved. Now such habits do come to be vicious by reason of pleasures and pains, that is, by men pursuing or avoiding respectively, either such as they ought not, or at wrong times, or in wrong manner, and so forth, for which reason, by the way. Some people define the virtues as certain states of impassibility and utter quietude. 7, but they are wrong because they speak without modification, instead of adding as they ought not, and when, and so on. Virtue then is assumed to be that habit which is such, in relation to pleasures and pains, as to effect the best results, and vice the contrary. Following considerations may also serve to set this in a clear light. There are principally 3 things moving us to choice and 3 to avoidance: the honorable, the expedient, the pleasant, and their 3 contraries, the dishonorable, the hurtful, and the painful. Now the good man is apt to go right, and the bad man wrong with respect to all these of course, but most specially with respect to pleasure, because not only is this common to him with all animals, but also it is a concomitant of all those things which move to choice. Since both the honorable and the expedient give an impression of pleasure. Again, it grows up with us all from infancy, and so it is a hard matter to remove from ourselves this feeling, ingrained as it is into our very life. Again, we adopt pleasure and pain, some of us more, and some less, as the measure even of actions. For this cause then our whole business must be with them, since to receive right or wrong impressions of pleasure and pain is a thing of no little importance in respect of the action. Once more, it is harder, as Heraclitus says, to fight against pleasure than against anger. Now it is about that which is more than commonly difficult that art comes into being, and virtue too, because in that which is difficult the good is of a higher order, and so for this reason too both virtue and moral philosophy generally must wholly busy themselves respecting pleasures and pains, because he that uses these well will be good, he that does so ill will be bad. Let us then be understood to have stated that virtue has for its object matter pleasures and pains, and that it is either increased or marred by the same circumstances, differently used, by which it is originally generated, and that it exerts itself on the same circumstances out of which it was generated. Chapter II. Now I can conceive a person perplexed as to the meaning of our statement, that men must do just actions to become just, and those of self-mastery to acquire the habit of self-mastery. For, he would say, if men are doing the actions they have the respective virtues already, just as men are grammarians or musicians when they do the actions of either art. May we not reply by saying that it is not so even in the case of the arts referred to, because a man may produce something grammatical either by chance or the suggestion of another, but then only will he be a grammarian when he not only produces something grammatical, but does so grammarian-wise, i.e., in virtue of the grammatical knowledge he himself possesses. Again, the cases of the arts and the virtues are not parallel, because those things which are produced by the arts have their excellence in themselves, and it is sufficient therefore that these when produced should be in a certain state. But those which are produced in the way of the virtues are, strictly speaking, actions of a certain kind, say of justice or perfected self-mastery, not merely if in themselves they are in a certain state, but if also he who does them being himself in a certain state. First, if knowing what he is doing, next, if with deliberate preference, and with such preference for the thing's own sake, and thirdly, if being himself stable and unapt to change. Now, to constitute possession of the arts, these requisites are not reckoned in, excepting the one point of knowledge, whereas for possession of the virtues knowledge avails little or nothing, but the other requisites avail not a little, but, in fact, are all in all, and these requisites as a matter of fact do come from oftentimes doing the actions of justice and perfected self-mastery. The facts, it is true, are called by the names of these habits when they are such as the just or perfectly self-mastering man would do, but he is not in possession of the virtues who merely does these facts, but he who also so does them as the just and self-mastering do them. We are right then in saying that these virtues are formed in a man by his doing the actions, but no one, if he should leave them undone, would be even in the way to become a good man. The people in general do not perform these actions, but taking refuge in talk they flatter themselves they are philosophizing, and that they will so be good men, acting in truth very like those sick people who listen to the doctor with great attention, but do nothing that he tells them, just as these then cannot be well bodily under such a course of treatment, so neither can those be mentally by such philosophizing. Chapter IV. Next we must examine what virtue is well, since the things which come to be in the mind are, in all, of three kinds: feelings, capacities, states. Virtue, of course, must belong to one of the three classes. Feelings, such as lust, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, friendship, hatred, longing, emulation, compassion, in short all such as are followed by pleasure or pain, by capacities, those in right of which we are said to be capable of these feelings, as by virtue of which we are able to have been made angry or grieved, or to have compassionated by states, those in right of which we are in a certain relation good or bad to the aforementioned feelings, to having been made angry, for instance. We are in a wrong relation if in our anger we were too violent or too slack, but if we were in the happy medium, we are in a right relation to the feeling. And so on of the rest. Now feelings neither the virtues nor vices are, because in right of the feelings we are not denominated either good or bad, but in right of the virtues and vices we are. Again, in right of the feelings we are neither praised nor blamed. 10. For a man is not commended for being afraid or being angry, nor blamed for being angry merely but for being so in a particular way, but in right of the virtues and vices we are. Again, both anger and fear we feel without moral choice, whereas the virtues are acts of moral choice, or at least certainly not independent of it. Moreover, in right of the feelings we are said to be moved, but in right of the virtues and vices not to be moved but disposed in a certain way. And for these same reasons they are not capacities, for we are not called good or bad merely because we are able to feel, nor are we praised or blamed. And again, capacities we have by nature, but we do not come to be good or bad by nature, as we have said before. Since then the virtues are neither feelings nor capacities, it remains that they must be states. Chapter V. Now what the genus of virtue is has been said, but we must not merely speak of it thus, that it is a state, but say also what kind of a state it is. We must observe then that all excellence makes that, whereof it is the excellence both to be itself in a good state, and to perform its work well. The excellence of the eye, for instance, makes both the eye good and its work also, for by the excellence of the eye we see well. So too, the excellence of the horse makes a horse good, and good in speed, and in carrying his rider and standing up against the enemy. If then this is universally the case, the excellence of man, i.e., virtue, must be a state whereby man comes to be good, and whereby he will perform well his proper work. Now how this shall be it is true we have said already, but still perhaps it may throw light on the subject to see what is its characteristic nature. In all quantity then, whether continuous or discrete 11 one may take the greater part, the less, or the exactly equal, and these either with reference to the thing itself, or relatively to us, and the exactly equal is a mean between excess and defect. Now by the mean of the thing, i.e., absolute mean, I denote that which is equidistant from either extreme, which of course is one and the same to all, and by the mean relatively to ourselves, that which is neither too much nor too little for the particular individual. This of course is not one nor the same to all. For instance, suppose 10 is too much and 2 too little. People take 6 for the absolute mean, because it exceeds the smaller sum by exactly as much as it is itself exceeded by the larger. And this mean is according to arithmetical proportion 12, but the mean relatively to ourselves must not be so found. For it does not follow, supposing 10 many 13 is too large a quantity to eat and 2 too small, that the trainer will order his man 6. Because for the person who is to take it this also may be too much or too little. For Milo it would be too little, but for a man just commencing his athletic exercises too much. Similarly two of the exercises themselves, as running or wrestling. So then it seems every one possessed of skill avoids excess and defect, but seeks for and chooses the mean, not the absolute but the relative. Now if all skill thus accomplishes well its work by keeping an eye on the mean, and bringing the works to this point, whence it is common enough to say of such works as are in a good state, one cannot add to or take aught from them, under the notion of excess or defect destroying goodness but the mean state preserving it, and good artisans, as we say, work with their eye on this, and excellence, like nature, is more exact and better than any art in the world, it must have an aptitude to aim at the mean. It is moral excellence, i.e., virtue of course which I mean, because this it is which is concerned with feelings and actions, and in these there can be excess and defect in the mean. It is possible, for instance, to feel the emotions of fear, confidence, lust, anger, compassion, and pleasure and pain generally, too much or too little, and in either case wrongly, but to feel them when we ought, on what occasions, towards whom, why, and as we should do is the mean, or in other words the best state, and this is the property of virtue. Like manner too, with respect to the actions, there may be excess and defect in the mean. Now virtue is concerned with feelings and actions, in which the excess is wrong and the defect is blamed, but the mean is praised and goes right, and both these circumstances belong to virtue. Virtue, then, is in a sense a mean state, since it certainly has an aptitude for aiming at the mean. Again, one may go wrong in many different ways because, as the Pythagoreans expressed it, evil is of the class of the infinite, good of the finite, but right only in one. And so the former is easy, the latter difficult, easy to miss the mark but hard to hit it. And for these reasons, therefore, both the excess and defect belong to vice, and the mean state to virtue, for, as the poet has it, men may be bad in many ways but good in one alone. Chapter VI. Virtue, then, is a state apt to exercise deliberate choice, being in the relative mean, determined by reason, and 14, as the man of practical wisdom would determine. It is a middle state between two faulty ones, in the way of excess on one side and of defect on the other, and it is so moreover, because the faulty states on one side fall short of, and those on the other exceed, what is right, both in the case of the feelings and the actions, but virtue finds, and when found adopts the mean. And so, viewing it in respect of its essence and definition, virtue is a mean state, but in reference to the chief good and to excellence it is the highest state possible. But it must not be supposed that every action or every feeling is capable of subsisting in this mean state, because some there are which are so named as immediately to convey the notion of badness, as malevolence, shamelessness, envy, or, to instance in actions, adultery, theft, homicide, for all these and such like are blamed because they are in themselves bad, not the having too much or too little of them. In these then you never can go right, but must always be wrong, nor in such does the right or wrong depend on the selection of a proper person, time, or manner, take adultery for instance, but simply doing any one soever of those things is being wrong. You might as well require that there should be determined a mean state, an excess and a defect in respect of acting unjustly, being cowardly, or giving up all control of the passions, for at this rate there will be of excess and defect a mean state, of excess, and of defect, defect. But just as of perfected self-mastery and courage there is no excess and defect, because the mean is in one point of view the highest possible state, so neither of those faulty states can you have a mean state, excess, or defect. But howsoever done they are wrong. You cannot, in short, have of excess and defect a mean state, nor of a mean state excess and defect. Chapter VII. It is not enough, however, to state this in general terms. We must also apply it to particular instances, because in treatises on moral conduct general statements have an air of vagueness, but those which go into detail one of greater reality, for the actions after all must be in detail, and the general statements, to be worth anything, must hold good. We must take these details, then, from the well-known scheme 15i. In respect of fears and confidence or boldness, the mean state is courage, Men may exceed, of course, either in absence of fear or in positive confidence. The former has no name, which is a common case. The latter is called rash again. The man who has too much fear and too little confidence is called a coward. Aye. In respect of pleasures and pains, but not all, and perhaps fewer pains than pleasures. The mean state here is perfected self-mastery, the defect total absence of self-control. As for defect in respect of pleasure, there are really no people who are chargeable with it. So, of course, there is really no name for such characters, but, as they are conceivable, we will give them one and call them insensible. Aye. In respect of giving and taking wealth 16a, the mean state is liberality, the excess prodigality, the defect stinginess. Here each of the extremes involves really an excess and effect contrary to each other. I mean, the prodigal gives out too much and takes in too little, while the stingy man takes in too much and gives out too little. It must be understood that we are now giving merely an outline and summary, intentionally, and we will, in a later part of the treatise, draw out the distinctions with greater exactness. IV. In respect of wealth b, there are other dispositions besides these just mentioned, a mean state called munificence, for the munificent man differs from the liberal, the former having necessarily to do with great wealth, the latter with but small, the excess called by the names either of want of taste or vulgar profusion, and the defect paltriness. These also differ from the extremes connected with liberality, and the manner of their difference shall also be spoken of later. V. In respect of honor and dishonor, a, the mean state greatness of soul, the excess which may be called chi alpha upsilon nu letter 1 f7 9 tau eta sigma, 17, and the defect littleness of soul. Vi. In respect of honor and dishonor, b, now there is a state bearing the same relation to greatness of soul as we said just now liberality does to munificence, with the difference that is of being about a small amount of the same thing. This state having reference to small honor, as greatness of soul to great honor. A man may, of course, grasp at honor either more than he should or less. Now he that exceeds in his grasping at it is called ambitious. He that falls short unambitious. He that is just as he should be has no proper name, nor in fact have the states, except that the disposition of the ambitious man is called ambition. For this reason those who are in either extreme lay claim to the mean as a debatable land, and we call the virtuous character sometimes by the name ambitious 18, sometimes by that of unambitious, and we commend sometimes the one, and sometimes the other. Why we do it shall be said in the subsequent part of the treatise, but now we will go on with the rest of the virtues after the plan we have laid down. VII. In respect of anger, here too there is excess, defect, and a mean state, but since they may be said to have really no proper names, as we call the virtuous character meek, we will call the mean state meekness, and of the extremes let the man who is excessive be denominated passionate, and the faulty state passionateness, and him who is deficient angerless, and the defect angerlessness. There are also three other mean states, having some mutual resemblance but still with differences. They are alike in that they all have for their object matter intercourse of words and deeds, and they differ in that one has respect to truth herein, the other two to what is pleasant, and this in two ways, the one in relaxation and amusement, the other in all things which occur in daily life. We must say a word or two about these also, that we may the better see that in all matters the mean is praiseworthy, while the extremes are neither right nor worthy of praise but of blame. Now of these it is true, the majority have really no proper names, but still we must try, as in the other cases, to coin some for them for the sake of clearness and intelligibleness. In respect of truth, the man who is in the mean state we will call truthful and his state truthfulness, and as to the disguise of truth, if it be on the side of exaggeration, braggadocio, and him that has it a braggadocio, if on that of diminution, reserve, and reserve shall be the term. In respect of what is pleasant in the way of relaxation or amusement. The mean state shall be called easy pleasantry, and the character accordingly a man of easy pleasantry, the excess buffoonery, and the man a buffoon, the man deficient herein a clown, and his state clownishness. In respect of what is pleasant in daily life. He that is as he should be may be called friendly, and his mean state friendliness he that exceeds, if it be without any interested motive, somewhat too complacent, if with such motive, a flatterer, he that is deficient and in all instances unpleasant, quarrelsome, and cross. There are mean states likewise in feelings and matters concerning them. Shamefacedness, for instance, is no virtue, still a man is praised for being shamefaced, for in these two the one is denominated the man in the mean state, the other in the excess. The dumbfoundered, for instance, who is overwhelmed with shame on all and any occasions, the man who is in the defect, i.e., who has no shame at all in his composition, is called shameless, but the right character shamefaced. Indignation against successful vice 19 again, is a state in the mean between envy and malevolence. They all three have respect to pleasure and pain produced by what happens to one's neighbor. For the man who has this right feeling is annoyed at undeserved success of others, while the envious man goes beyond him, and is annoyed at all success of others. And the malevolent falls so far short of feeling annoyance that he even rejoices at misfortune of others. Is a state in the mean between envy and malevolence. They all three have respect to pleasure and pain produced by what happens to one's neighbor. For the man who has this right feeling is annoyed at undeserved success of others, while the envious man goes beyond him, and is annoyed at all success of others. And the malevolent falls so far short of feeling annoyance that he even rejoices at misfortune of others. But for the discussion of these also there will be another opportunity, as of justice too, because the term is used in more senses than one. So after this, we will go accurately into each and say how they are mean states, and in like manner also with respect to the intellectual excellences. Chapter VII. Now as there are three states in each case, two faulty either in the way of excess or defect, and one right which is the mean state, of course all are in a way opposed to one another. The extremes, for instance, not only to the mean but also to one another, and the mean to the extremes, for just as the half is greater if compared with the less portion, and less if compared with the greater, so the mean states, compared with the defects, exceed, whether in feelings or actions, and vice versa. Brave man, for instance, shows as rash when compared with the coward, and cowardly when compared with the rash. Similarly too the man of perfected self-mastery, viewed in comparison with the man destitute of all perception, shows like a man of no self-control. But in comparison with the man who really has no self-control, he looks like one destitute of all perception, and the liberal man compared with the stingy seems prodigal, and by the side of the prodigal stingy. And so the extreme characters push away, so to speak, towards each other the man in the mean state. The brave man is called a rash man by the coward, and a coward by the rash man, and in the other cases accordingly. And there being this mutual opposition, the contrariety between the extremes is greater than between either and the mean, because they are further from one another than from the mean, just as the greater or less portion differ more from each other than either from the exact half. Again, in some cases an extreme will bear a resemblance to the mean, rashness, for instance, to courage, and prodigality to liberality, but between the extremes there is the greatest dissimilarity. Now things which are furthest from one another 20 are defined to be contrary, and so the further off the more contrary will they be. Further, of the extremes in some cases the excess, and in others the defect, is most opposed to the mean, to courage, for instance, not rashness which is the excess, but cowardice which is the defect, whereas to perfected self-mastery not insensibility which is the defect but absence of all self-control which is the excess. And for this there are two reasons to be given, one from the nature of the thing itself, because from the one extreme being nearer and more like the mean, we do not put this against it, but the other, as, for instance, since rashness is thought to be nearer to courage than cowardice is, and to resemble it more, we put cowardice against courage rather than rashness, because those things which are further from the mean are thought to be more contrary to it. This then is one reason arising from the thing itself. There is another arising from our own constitution and make, for in each man's own case, those things give the impression of being more contrary to the mean to which we individually have a natural bias. Thus we have a natural bias towards pleasures, for which reason we are much more inclined to the rejection of all self-control than to self-discipline. These things then to which the bias is, we call more contrary, and so total want of self-control, the excess, is more contrary than the defect is to perfected self-mastery. Chapter IX. Now that moral virtue is a mean state, and how it is so, and that it lies between two faulty states, one in the way of excess and another in the way of defect, and that it is so because it has an aptitude to aim at the mean both in feelings and actions. All this has been set forth fully and sufficiently. So it is hard to be good, for surely hard it is in each instance to find the mean, just as to find the mean point or center of a circle is not what any man can do, but only he who knows how, just so to be angry, to give money and be expensive, is what any man can do and easy, but to do these to the right person in due proportion at the right time with a right object, and in the right manner, this is not as before what any man can do, nor is it easy. And for this cause goodness is rare, and praiseworthy and noble. Therefore he who aims at the mean should make it his first care to keep away from that extreme which is more contrary than the other to the mean, just as Calypso in Homer advises Ulysses, "Clear of this smoke and surge thy bark direct," because of the two extremes the one is always more, and the other less erroneous, and therefore, since to hit exactly on the mean is difficult, One must take the least of the evils as the safest plan. 21. And this a man will be doing, if he follows this method. We ought also to take into consideration our own natural bias, which varies in each man's case, and will be ascertained from the pleasure and pain arising in us. Furthermore, we should force ourselves off in the contrary direction, because we shall find ourselves in the mean after we have removed ourselves far from the wrong side, exactly as men do in straightening bent timber. 22. But in all cases we must guard most carefully against what is pleasant and pleasure itself, because we are not impartial judges of it. We ought to feel in fact towards pleasure as did the old counselors towards Helen, and in all cases pronounce a similar sentence, for so by sending it away from us, we shall err the less. 23. Well, to speak very briefly, these are the precautions by adopting which we shall be best able to attain the mean. Still, perhaps after all it is a matter of difficulty, and specially in the particular instances, it is not easy, for instance, to determine exactly in what manner, with what persons, for what causes, and for what length of time one ought to feel anger, for we ourselves sometimes praise those who are defective in this feeling, and we call them meek. At another, we term the hot-tempered manly and spirited. Then again, he who makes a small deflection from what is right, be it on the side of too much or too little, is not blamed, only he who makes a considerable one, for he cannot escape observation. To what point or degree a man must err in order to incur blame, it is not easy to determine exactly in words, nor in fact any of those points which are matter of perception by the moral sense. Such questions are matters of detail, and the decision of them rests with the moral sense. 24. At all events thus much is plain, that the mean state is in all things praiseworthy, and that practically we must deflect sometimes towards excess, sometimes towards defect. Because this will be the easiest method of hitting on the mean, that is, on what is right.